Welcome to episode 11 of the E-Talk with Don and Sri. We're joined here with a special guest, Oscar, who is the former Global VP of E-Commerce for Kellogg. And we're going to talk about globalization, which is really a fascinating topic. Oscar, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, thanks for having me. So I'm Oscar Kaszubski. I've run global e-commerce for the last 7 years. Recently, I was the Global VP of e-commerce for Kellogg. Prior to that at Mondelez, and prior to that at Kimberly-Clark. So I know all about e-commerce, how to launch it globally, and how to take the sales to a new level.
All right, Oscar, I think it's a fascinating subject, and I'm interested in your perspective. I think it's truly unique that a shopper could be in China, can be in her home, it could be late at night, she could purchase a product on her phone and have that product that she orders from China arrive from the US in 2 to 3 days. So tell us what you think about globalization as it relates to e-commerce.
Absolutely. So globalization is a fascinating topic for me, for many different layers. Number one is every single CPG company wants to grow. And a lot of that growth depends on actually driving sales outside of US. So having the right strategy for globalization and understanding the differences between the markets is absolutely critical. So for example, when we're talking about click and collect, the most developed click and collect is in France with Auchan and Leclerc. So this is the best in class that a lot of the brands from US are just learning that, Kroger, Walmart. But when we're talking to C2C, for example, it's China. It's China, all about Alibaba, all about Tmall, all about Taobao. These are the marketplaces that actually drive, the entire innovation for that. So I think understanding what is the level of development in each country, what is the best in class model is absolutely critical. So US has perfected Amazon model, which is, Prime model, ship it within 2 days, deliver it. But for them in China, the delivery is much quicker. We're talking about delivery within 12 to 24 hours. And so, from that perspective, the brands have to kind of think about it a little bit differently. So for me, it's a fascinating topic. It's a fast moving space. And I think there's a lot of innovation that is happening all over the world.
All right, Oscar, so a full mouthful there. Great intel. Interested to see, are there any challenges that you've encountered with brands scaling globally?
Yes, one of the biggest challenges we have is actually with fraud. So making sure that the product that we are selling within China that is coming from the legit source, it's absolutely critical. And I think, this is where working very closely with Alibaba and JD.com, how to introduce that product properly into the market, how to ensure the product safety, and how to, build up the entire product awareness. Is absolutely critical. But I think from a perspective of priorities is understanding that Chinese consumer is highly affluential, highly aspirational. So it's actually not that hard to get Western brands into the Chinese market and set them for success.
Speaking of globalization, Oscar, I find it fascinating that for Mother's Day, my mom, who's in India, in Calcutta, India, I can actually, while watching the Yankees at 7 p.m. at night, send something to Mama. I can send her flowers, I can send her chocolate, stuff that she likes, and in 2 days it actually shows up. All from sitting in my living room couch watching the Yankees play. Isn't that fascinating, man?
Absolutely.
All right, Oscar, so we're very interested if you can help our audience understand a little bit more about cross-border e-commerce and the China Free Trade Zone.
Yeah, from my experience, there's a lot of things happening, right? Number one, when I was at Kellogg, there was a huge concerns of food safety just within the food industry within China. Alibaba and JD.com really understood is that the quickest way to actually get the product into the country was through the cross-border. That's why they set up their offices in London and asked a lot of the brands to start actually shipping product from Europe or from Australia into China so the Chinese consumers could order them online very quickly. So in a way, for a lot of brands, cross-border is an entry into the Chinese market, as well as the same thing is happening in Korea with Coupang. So it's like a perfect way to test the water to understand the size of the category, understand the consumer preference, and what it would take, and how to win on Baidu, how to win on Ren, and really kind of understand, in terms of the next steps, what would it take to create a winning strategy.
One of the things, Oscar, I'm always intrigued is when I go shopping for ethnic food products, like let's say Indian stores or Sri Lankan stores, my heritage, I walk in and I can practically find in those stores in the United States, right in Queens, anything I want from those countries. I'm sure a lot of that stuff isn't FDA cleared. How the heck does that happen? Are these store owners actually just placing orders online and these things are coming over to them? Would that be okay?
Yeah, I mean, that happens quite a bit, within the industry. For example, when I was selling Mondelez within North America on Amazon, marketplace, a lot of the product from Japan was making its way through. So for, Oreo for gamers with, Japanese Pokemon symbols. So that happens quite a bit. There's a lot of smaller merchants that resell the product specifically on 3P. The challenge that we have is with that is the product is not necessarily, approved to be sold, within that given geography. We don't know also the storage conditions. So I think from that perspective, we need to be very clear how we are actually protecting our brands in what geographies. But for me, this is also an opportunity for a brand to understand that if third-party sellers are actually doing this, this is an opportunity to do a direct import under certain conditions where we can actually bring that product from overseas to here.
In my experience, similar to yours, 15, 16 years in CPG, many of those in e-com, global was a buzzword in my experience. And the aspiration was to grow, whether it was 20, 30, 40%. Brands at times had challenges with the nuances in different regions. They knew they wanted to grow, but they had trouble articulating the specific vision and tactics to grow region to region. I'd be interested to see your thoughts and your experience. What works, what doesn't?
I think there's a lot of things going at the play. First of all, it's very hard to set global e-commerce targets. Just because of 30%, 40%, what it truly means. Understanding
one size doesn't fit all.
Exactly, and understanding the differences between categories, understanding what is the potential, how big is the online market penetration in a given territory, how big is 1% of a market share shift. When we're selling at Kellogg, 1% of snacks business at Kellogg was much bigger opportunity than any other categories in any other market. And I think getting the brands to truly being able to measure that is absolutely critical. It's easy, for example, to say it's like, well, India right now it's 5 million, but it should be 100 million. How are we going to get there? People think it's just going to be Flipkart. We can do everything from Flipkart and it's going to be fine. This is not the case. I think, we have to have a broader strategy saying, just by Flipkart being Flipkart, we can accomplish this. We really got to hone in onto the preferences of consumers. We have to understand this. What is our C2C strategy in China? Are we going to hone in on Taobao? How are we going to actually play Taobao against Alibaba and JD.com? It's critical. What I found, it's the easiest way to do it is measure the markets and use, for example, Euromonitor data to create a baseline across every single market, every single category, to just create one single story of the growth for the future. And I think that allows us to just level set with every single president of BUs, with every single market leader, where we go in, where we have the biggest opportunity. Because most of the CPGs making a mistake of building out the teams first and then really building the pathway for growth. I believe it should be the reverse.
Great. So you heard it. One size does not fit all. Euromonitor, really get your arms around the data, and do not subscribe to the build it and they will come theory. Really test it out, make sure it's right, and then scale.
Absolutely.
So you heard the buzz, guys. Direct import is the buzzword, I guess. But I had another question for you. You just referred to small stores buying these, or small merchants, right? You talked about one of the challenges of scaling is fraud in product. What about fraud in payments?
I mean, that happens, but I don't think it's as big of a deal as people are actually making it to happen. I think a lot of people are actually exploring currency fluctuations. So for example, I had somebody calling me from Alice Springs in Australia and said, you guys got to give me a better pricing in Australia. I was like, how is that? Well, it's cheaper for me to send a container and buy it directly from Alibaba, put it on a container and ship it, to me, versus buying it directly from your Australian entity. So the pricing fluctuation is constantly being explored. And, a few years back, for example, Japanese yen went down by 20% almost overnight. And that, you could see it on Amazon. Every single product was bought to be resold somewhere else. So understanding all of the currency, movement is absolutely critical in this market.
That's crazy, man. Next thing you know, people will be ordering kangaroos from Australia. I hope you never ship that stuff. So Oscar, if you're a vendor in the United States, or like a manufacturer that's primarily anchored your businesses in the United States, Don and you had such a great conversation about the globalization of commerce. Should you really be investing in China? Should you be finding a way? You mentioned Alibaba quite a few times. Should you find a way to actually start a store in Alibaba? How does this work? What should people in the US do? Maybe even a retailer needs to?
Well, there's a lot of ways to actually go after the Chinese market. Number one is do their research, understand how much of a pool there is, because it's much harder to establish a new category, for example, in China. We had this very similar example at Kellogg when we were talking about the breakfast category. There is no cereal breakfast category in China. We're developing it from ground up. So, to being able to establish that is very hard. If there is an existing category, there are two ways of looking at it. Number one is you can actually reach out to the cross-category teams at Alibaba, at JD.com, at Coupang, even in South Korea, to actually understand this, how much of a pool there could be there, and start having conversation. Is it a big category for them, to get them involved? Because that's the easiest way. It's very easy to get through the cross-border. Secondary, an option is to find like a third-party operator. And one of them that I used in the past was Export Now. So Export Now works with the likes of Smuckers, which is a US brand, Ocean Spray, and they represent the brands, and they help the brands to be established, on Alibaba, on JD.com, and create all of those relationships. I think, down the line, we might have another episode just on Alibaba, because it's a fascinating topic, how to actually make it work. But I think from that perspective, it's very simple. You can actually set it up, the operations, and just don't start with, I'm going to open the Alibaba store, I'm going to build it up, and they will come to me. That's not a strategy. You got to get the commercial strategy first. So if you actually ask for help, either the cross-border team or of a third-party operator like Export Now, it's valuable, and you can do it very quickly and assess if you can actually make sense for you to spend all the money to build it out, the presence online.
Awesome. Hey folks, that's a wrap on episode 12. Don and I want to thank you, Oscar, for coming on board and talking to us. And did I hear you correctly? Did you just volunteer to be back in a few weeks to decompose Alibaba for our audience? And for that, I want to thank you, because guys, he just signed up to come back in a few weeks and decompose Alibaba.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Listen, thank you for having me, and I'm happy to be here back anytime,
Thank you.